Tonight we're boarding a train. But not just any train. You step into the warm, clattering chaos of a 19th century railway station, brass glinting in the gaslight, and the distant hiss of steam breathing down your neck. You're holding your coat tight as you push through the crowd, heart thumping, not because you're late, but because what's in your hand isn't some flimsy slip of thermal paper. No. It's a miniature masterpiece. Your ticket. It's heavy with ink, edged in intricate flourishes, and printed on creamy cardstock so thick it could probably stop a mild breeze. And if you drop it, good luck getting another before the train huffs away. This is the golden age of rail travel. But spoiler, you probably wouldn't survive the trip if you wandered too far from first class. Between firebox explosions, collapsing bridges, and a distinct lack of seatbelts, Victorian rail was basically a steam-powered dare. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling friendly, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint at the delicate borders curling around your name like vines on a wedding invitation. It feels important. The print is tight, serifed, and somehow elegant, like it came from a poet's press rather than a transport office. You run a thumb across the raised embossing, yes, embossing, and wonder why something so disposable was made to last. But that's the thing. In the mid to late 1800s, train tickets weren't meant to vanish in the lint trap of your trousers. They were documents, proof, passes, and in many ways, they were also tiny ambassadors for the railway companies that printed them, fighting for your loyalty in the age of steel and steam. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about noise and smoke. It was also about branding. Competing railways wanted to stand out, to entice you aboard not just with low fares or better routes, but with a little rectangle of prestige you could show off to your traveling companions. Tickets became something closer to jewelry than stationery. Some even came in little presentation envelopes, complete with wax seals. And don't let the quaintness fool you. The stakes were high. Trains were a revolution, yes, but they were also logistical nightmares. There were no electronic records, no barcodes, no backup systems. That little card in your hand, it held the key to your entire itinerary. One smudge, and you could be stranded in the middle of Gloucestershire explaining yourself to a grumpy station master with a clipboard and a moustache large enough to shelter wildlife. But let's back up. Why were tickets necessary in the first place? In the early 1800s, trains were still new and chaotic. Before tickets, conductors had to ask passengers one by one where they were headed, collect the correct fare, and trust that no one had sneaked on at the last station. You can imagine how well that went. So a printed ticket uniform, pre-approved, exact, wasn't just beautiful. It was a revolution in crowd control. One of the earliest innovations came from a man named Thomas Edmondson, a former cabinet maker who designed a small, pre-printed cardboard ticket. These weren't flimsy scraps, they were sturdy, stiff, and stackable. He even invented a special press to stamp them out like cookies and a register to sell them with maximum speed. It was basically the 19th century version of a high-tech vending machine, except the product was precision-crafted art. Historians still argue whether Edmondson's influence shaped the artistic direction of ticket design, or whether it was just a side effect of printers trying to show off. But what's not debated is how his ticket system swept the railway world. By the 1850s, Edmondson's format was the gold standard. Other printers began competing to make their tickets more elaborate, more secure, and let's face it, more snazzy. And the public noticed. Victorians loved ornamentation. They wallpapered their walls with patterns, filled their parlours with ferns and lace, and wrote letters with more flourishes than actual content. So when you handed over a plain, ugly ticket, it looked cheap, Ugly tickets didn't just suggest low status, they suggested disorganization. And in a time when train travel was still a bit scary, again, bridges collapsed a lot, you wanted to believe the company knew what it was doing. A fancy ticket? That meant competence. Oh, and let's not forget the souvenir factor. Some travelers kept their tickets in albums like postage stamps. They pinned them to corkboards or tucked them into diaries. One Victorian woman even stitched a sampler out of her train stubs. To her, they weren't waste, they were witness. Proof of journeys, of escape, of independence. Especially for women, who were starting to travel more alone, scandal, the ticket became a quiet kind of trophy. And of course, not every railway printed golden masterpieces. Some were all business, black ink, sharp corners, serial numbers marching in neat little rows. But others went wild. Curly fonts, jewel-toned paper, allegorical artwork. Some even had little silver foils embedded, just in case you forgot how fancy this whole ordeal was supposed to feel. One fringe story tells of a particular Italian route where the ticket backs were printed with miniature reproductions of religious icons. So yes, while you were chugging through mountain passes in mortal peril, you could casually invoke the Virgin Mary without even flipping to the next page of your devotional. What made these tickets stand out wasn't just beauty, it was utility wrapped in extravagance. These were passports to a new way of living, moving, being. You weren't just catching a train. You were participating in the future. And there's something poetic about that, right? That even in the gritty machine age of soot and gears, someone, somewhere, thought you deserved a little rectangle of elegance to hold in your hand. Something nice. Something lovely. Something that said, we know you're going somewhere. And we want to make sure you get there in style. Even if the train still smelled vaguely of coal and boiled cabbage. You're still holding the ticket, your fingers smudged ever so slightly by the ink, the corners softening with your grip. The platform hums with life behind you, shouting porters, clinking trunks, a violinist playing something vaguely cheerful in a minor key. But you can't stop staring at the ticket. Not just because it's pretty. No, there's something deliberate about it. Like every flourish and border has a purpose. And in the frantic world of 19th century rail travel, it absolutely did. See, back then, train stations were madness. Imagine a mall, an airport, and a cattle auction all smushed together with zero central heating and only half the signage. There were no electronic announcements, no glowing departures boards, no cheery chimes guiding you toward Gate A12. If you were lucky, someone with a chalkboard might update the time before the train actually left. If you were unlucky, you found out your train was gone by the sound of it already leaving. And that's where ticket design came in, not just as a receipt, but as the station master's secret weapon. Each ticket was a compact visual code. From the font to the color to the shape of the perforations, it told employees everything they needed to know at a glance. Where you were going, what route you'd take, whether you'd be sitting in third class with the farmhands or first class with the people who didn't have to worry about coal dust in their champagne. Rail workers were trained to read these at speed, like grocery clerks scanning barcodes long before barcodes existed. A violet ticket with gilt edging and a square notch. First class, express, northern route. A dull grey slip with blocky type and 3-corner holes. Third class, local, milk stops included. It was a visual system, design as logistics. The beauty wasn't optional. It was functional. Some stations processed thousands of passengers per hour. With no computers or walkie-talkies, it all came down to paper. Your ticket was a moving part in the machine, a cog printed in teal ink and pressed by hand. And if it didn't look exactly right, you didn't get through the gate. Ticket inspectors became experts at decoding this ephemeral language. They could sniff out a forged stub from 6 feet away. If the scrollwork on the border curled the wrong direction, or the serial number looked one digit off, you were hauled aside for questioning. And yes, that happened. Frequently. It wasn't just about fare evasion. A single forged ticket could throw off an entire compartment's allocation, back when railroads were strict about assigned seating. In fact, that's one reason so many 19th century tickets were printed with elaborate curls, borders, and logos, anti-chaos camouflage. The more ornate and standardized the design, the harder it was for a scammer to duplicate. But even if you weren't a criminal mastermind, there were still issues. Say you lost your ticket, or it got wet, or your toddler chewed a corner off. You couldn't just pull up an app. You'd need to find the nearest station office, hope they believed your story, and possibly pay again. The idea of the customer is always right had not yet entered the Victorian vocabulary. One railway, the Great Western, if you're curious, got so frustrated by passenger confusion that they began stamping little miniature maps on the back of tickets. Just the local section. Nothing too helpful. But enough that you, standing dazed and mildly damp in Reading Station, could squint at the ticket and figure out if you'd missed your stop. Historians still argue whether this was an act of user-friendliness or a subtle form of mockery. You can't read the timetable, Nigel? Fine. Here. Drawings. Then there were time slots. Trains didn't just leave on the hour. Some routes had multiple departures within minutes of each other, and with no loudspeakers or signs, the only way to tell which train you were boarding was, yep, your ticket. Some lines introduced small color stripes on the edge to indicate morning, afternoon, or evening runs. Others printed departure times in massive ornate numerals right in the center of the designed dead center, so not even the most distracted traveler could miss it. Of course, that didn't stop people from getting it wrong. One fringe story involves a group of tourists in 1889 who misread the elaborate font on their tickets and boarded a livestock train instead. They were only discovered halfway through the journey when one of them complained, somewhat politely, that there was no tea service in their carriage, only hay and something suspiciously mooing. But for station masters, the ticket's visual design was crucial. A beautiful, clear, distinct ticket meant fewer arguments, faster boarding, smoother departures. Every delay cost money. Every confused traveler became a liability. And so, ticket printing became an industry within an industry, its own competitive, cutthroat little world of aesthetics and utility. Railways even held internal competitions to design new ticket formats. One British company awarded a junior clerk a bonus for suggesting a red and cream two-tone ticket design that reduced gate confusion by 19%, also they claimed. Another line experimented with triangular tickets. It did not go well. Turns out, corners make stacking difficult. And if you're wondering why no one just yelled train times into the crowd, don't worry, they tried that. Many stations hired call boys whose entire job was to run up and down the platform shouting things like, 11:15 to York via Doncaster, all aboard. Unfortunately, this also led to several people accidentally boarding the wrong train because the call boy's voice cracked. Puberty, the silent rail saboteur. What's quietly fascinating is how the tension between beauty and bureaucracy played out on these tiny scraps of card. A station master wanted precision. A printer wanted flair. A traveler wanted legibility. And somehow, in the middle of all that, they produced objects that still look stunning 150 years later. You glance back at the platform one more time as the whistle sounds. Your beautifully designed ticket is now slightly crumpled from the death grip you've had on it. The conductor tips his cap, and with a clunk and a jolt, the train begins to move. Out the window, the station fades, but you keep the ticket close, just in case someone asks. You don't want to be that person fumbling in your pockets as the coal soot rolls in. Not tonight. You're in your seat now. Well, More like a polished velvet throne watching the world blur past in a smear of hedgerows, chimneys, and startled birds. Your fingers absently trace the raised letters on the ticket in your lap. The curves. The swashes. The font. And now, for the first time, you really look at it. The typeface isn't just legible. It's theatrical. Confident. It demands to be seen. That's no accident. Back in the 19th century, the typeface used on your train ticket could tell you nearly as much as the words themselves. Not just what train, where you were headed, or how much you paid, but who you were riding with. Because rail companies didn't just compete on service or safety. They competed with fonts. And every loop, serif, and swirl was a flex. Ticket typography was branding in its rawest form. Each company commissioned or developed its own distinctive lettering, sometimes hiring independent type foundries to craft a look that screamed "we're punctual and posh" or "no-nonsense trains for no-nonsense people." You might not have consciously noticed it, but your brain did. Swirly, floral fonts. That was probably the Midland Railway, proud of its dainty liveries and genteel clientele. Brutalist block letters with minimal spacing? That could only be the Glasgow and South Western, more soot, fewer apologies. The tiniest elements mattered. Serif or sans serif? Condensed or wide? Italics for class codes or straight caps for destinations? These weren't idle design choices. These were uniforms in ink. You could glance at a torn stub on the ground and know instantly, a man from the Great Northern just passed through. Likely carrying boiled ham. Printers knew this, too. And like any design war, it became a game of one-upmanship. By the 1870s, some companies had full-time staff whose job was to design, update, and refine ticket templates. Entire cabinets were filled with brass printing blocks, each one a tiny sculpted letter or flourish, often engraved by hand. These weren't fonts you downloaded. These were fonts you bled for. Literally, in some cases. It's rumored one apprentice in Leeds permanently lost the use of a finger while carving a new ampersand. Still, the results were glorious. Historians still argue whether these lavish styles helped passengers navigate stations more efficiently, or whether they just looked nice and made passengers feel more secure. Either way, the fonts were doing heavy lifting. They made a chaotic, noisy experience feel intentional, even dignified. Let's pause for a moment and talk about the weird side of this obsession. One fringe phenomenon? Fonts with emotions. Yes. A few rail companies experimented with mood-based typography. The idea was that tickets for scenic routes might use flowing, romantic letters to reflect the experience, while business commuters would get bold, no-nonsense block text. The Northeastern Railway actually piloted a font called Slateface, meant to convey stern efficiency. Critics called it visually aggressive. One passenger said it looked like it was shouting at him before breakfast. Needless to say, Slateface didn't last. But some font trends did endure. Italicized class markers, bold departure times, and destination names in tall caps all became semi-standard. Even the spacing told a story. Some railways compressed their lettering to fit on smaller tickets, while others deliberately left wide margins just in case you needed to scribble notes, directions, or panicked love confessions before boarding. There's also the matter of layout. Victorian ticket design often followed rigid hierarchies, company name at the top, destination dead center, fare on the left, class on the right. But some lines got creative. One company arranged its elements in a circular format, creating a ticket that looked like a clock face, possibly a nod to train schedules, possibly just a printer showing off. Another issued vertical tickets designed to be read while dangling from a keychain, which sounds cool until you remember that keychains weren't really common until about 60 years later. Still, even the most bizarre layouts had fans. There's something satisfying about holding a piece of paper that looks like it was meant to be held. balanced, harmonious, like an invitation to a very fast-moving wedding. And then there were the logos. Oh, the logos. Every railway had one, sometimes more than one. Shields, wings, lions, wheels, crossed hammers, exploding suns. They were squeezed into ticket corners, embossed over the fare, or pressed faintly into the background. They functioned like a seal of authenticity and a visual brand marker. If you saw a golden griffin rampant on a crimson background, you knew it was the Grand Duchess Royal Line, not some shady imitation. This attention to detail wasn't just about looking good. It was about trust. With so many different rail companies operating simultaneously, passengers needed to feel confident that their ticket wasn't just a pretty scrap, it was official. Proper logos, fancy typefaces, intricate layouts, these were the anti-forgery tools of their day. Not just beautiful. Necessary. One of the stranger side effects. Typeface envy. Collectors would hoard tickets not by destination or route, but by font. One London enthusiast in 1886 reportedly had a scrapbook labelled The Italic Affair, a deeply personal journey through every italic printed train stub he'd ever received. Some pages were annotated with notes like lovely serif tail or excellent X-height, though a bit needy in its posture. And yes, typography competitions emerged, too. Some railways publicly displayed their latest ticket designs and let the public vote on favourites. It was like the Great British Bake Off, but with more printing ink and fewer scones. All of this sounds delightfully excessive now, of course. But at the time, it mattered. When rail travel was still a little terrifying, no seatbelts, no automatic brakes, no real safety standards, your ticket was a kind of promise. Its beauty wasn't frivolous. It was a whisper, we've thought this through. You're safe here. Trust the letters. You glance back down at your own stub. Its font is delicate but clear. The loop on the queue flirts with the edge of the frame. The number 4 has a tiny curl like a mischievous eyebrow. Someone designed this with care, not because they had to, but because they wanted it to feel like more than paper. It worked. The train rocks gently as it rolls over iron rails, a rhythmic clunking beneath your feet like the heartbeat of industry itself. You've settled into a kind of cozy hypnosis until you hear it. A soft click, a metallic chomp, and the faintest rustle of paper. The conductor's coming. And in his hand, a long, gleaming punch tool, like a cross between a stapler and a nutcracker, poised over a stack of tickets. Yours included. He doesn't just glance at them. He inspects. Eyes flicking over each one, he lines up the edge just so, and punches. A single hole, perfectly placed. Not a mindless chomp, oh no. This is choreography. Each click of that tool is a code, a marker, a conversation between rail worker and railway. And in a weird way, it's also a form of art. Welcome to the world of the ticket punch, a tiny, unsung hero of 19th century rail design. You wouldn't think much of it. Just a hole in a ticket. A mutilation, really. But look closer. The holes aren't random. Sometimes they're circles, sometimes diamonds, stars, triangles, even crescent moons. One famous railway in Bavaria had a punch shaped like a bird's footprint. It wasn't whimsy, it was functionality. Each conductor carried a unique punch, allowing anyone, especially the ticket inspectors, to immediately identify who had validated what. Think of it like a signature in negative space. This was crucial in an age before carbon copies, QR codes, or even good handwriting. If something went wrong, say, a fare discrepancy, or someone swore they'd already paid, the punch was evidence. It told you which staff member to talk to, and on what leg of the journey the ticket had been processed. Some conductors got weirdly attached to their punch shapes. One man on the Paris-Orleans line carried his crescent moon punch for 33 years and was buried with it when he died. No joke. There's even a blurry photo of his coffin, and yes, the punch is clearly pinned to his lapel like a Medal of Honor. Historians still argue whether the decorative punch shapes originated for practical reasons or simply from printer vanity. It's possible they started as a way to prevent simple forgeries. You could reproduce a ticket's text, sure, but mimicking a conductor's exact punch shape? Much harder without the specific die tool. And the die tools themselves were jealously guarded, often locked in station safes between shifts. Then there's the position of the hole. Again, not random. A ticket punched in the top left might mean full fare paid. Top right, half fare. Bottom center, boarded late, notify inspector. Some railways even developed punch patterns, with multiple holes in specific configurations to mark different legs of a journey. So your ticket wasn't just a stub, it was a data sheet, annotated with holes and creases like some primitive precursor to computer punch cards. But here's where it gets oddly lovely. Over time, these punched tickets, when collected, started to look like tiny mosaics. Travelers who kept them in scrapbooks, and yes, people absolutely did that, began to notice the accidental beauty. Star shapes aligned in rows, or crescent moon holes arcing across pages like lunar calendars. One railway clerk in Austria is said to have made an entire lampshade from discarded punched tickets, the light filtering through the patterns like stained glass. Not OSHA approved, but hauntingly pretty. And remember that conductor punching your ticket just now? He wasn't just some grumpy guy in a cap. Back then, the conductor was a kind of roving monarch. He controlled the doors, the tickets, the schedule. He could make or break your day with the twitch of a mustache and the angle of his hole punch. His tool was status. And passengers watched. Because if he didn't punch your ticket correctly, or at all, you could get fined, or worse, ejected at the next station with no refund and a long walk home through suspiciously muddy farmland. To cope with this pressure, some conductors developed flourish rituals. One might flick the ticket twice before punching. Another might sniff dramatically and produce the tool from a vest holster like a gunslinger. One German conductor reportedly tapped each ticket 3 times against his boot heel for luck. He was either extremely superstitious or really bored. Of course, all of this came with its share of hiccups. One fringe account tells of a prankster conductor who fashioned a punch shaped like a tiny X, leading passengers to panic, thinking their tickets had been voided. Another used a heart-shaped punch, which caused entirely different kinds of confusion. Imagine explaining that to your traveling companion. No, really, the conductor put a heart in everyone's ticket, darling. Some companies leaned into the theatricality. They issued conductor tools with multiple punch heads, allowing staff to switch shapes depending on the journey leg. Think of it like a ticket version of a mood ring. Heading into the mountains? Use the snowflake. Coastal route? Deploy the wave. That conductor wasn't just checking your fare. He was curating an experience. But there was a darker reason for all this meticulous punching: fraud. Ticket forgery was a real problem. Especially on crowded routes, it was shockingly easy to reuse a ticket, just avoid the conductor or claim your stub had fallen under the seat. A clear, distinctive punch solved that problem. Once your ticket was marked, it was effectively locked. Personalized. Trackable. Eventually, some railways even started punching the moment of sale. You'd get a pre-punched ticket, coded to your route and fare, before you ever saw the platform. Then the conductor would add a second punch during inspection. Like a 2-step verification system in cardboard. The ticket you hold now? It has a clean little triangular notch near the top. Crisp edges. You wonder who made the punch, and how many thousands of times it's clicked open and shut. That hole, it's not just damage. It's memory. A timestamp. A subtle message that says, you were here. This happened. This ride is real. And something about that feels oddly comforting. The train drifts into a long, rhythmic lull. The countryside outside has gone dreamy, fields stitched with hedgerows, pale skies brushed in dusklight, the occasional startled cow blinking as you rumble past. You shift slightly in your seat, the soft scratch of wool against leather, and your fingers find the ticket again. But this time, you flip it over. The back is blank, or at least it should be. But someone scrawled something there. A name, maybe. Or a half-finished sentence. You stare a little harder. And then you remember, in the 19th century, people wrote all kinds of strange things on their tickets. Not just names or reminders. Sometimes, messages, wishes, beliefs. Because here's the truth, for a brief, bizarre chapter in history, some people believed their train tickets weren't just fare receipts. They were spiritual tokens. Tiny slips of paper that, for the right mind, could tell your fortune, alter your luck, maybe even link you to the afterlife. Welcome to the weird and wonderful fringe world of occult ticket mysticism. You think I'm joking? Let's start with the numbers. Victorian travelers were obsessed with them. Serial numbers, especially. Entire superstitions grew around them. If your ticket ended in a 7, it was lucky. A 0? Bad omen. 3 6s? Might as well cancel your trip and crawl back to bed. Some passengers even begged for ticket exchanges on the spot, citing numerical discomfort, which must have made life just so fun for ticket clerks. But it didn't stop there. Some spiritualists, those ever-present Victorian fringe dwellers, believed train tickets held residual energy. The idea was simple. Each ticket had a destination, a time, a purpose. It carried intention. And if you tapped into that energy, you could divine things. Your future. Your fate. The shape of your next great love. It sounds ridiculous now, but for people steeped in seances and ghost photography, it wasn't such a stretch. There are journals, mostly private, mostly eccentric, that describe rituals involving rail tickets. One woman in Sussex, writing in 1874, claimed she could predict the gender of her unborn child by burning used train tickets and reading the curls of the smoke. Another man claimed that if you folded your ticket into thirds and pressed it under your pillow, you'd dream of the person who would betray you next. Very helpful. Slightly terrifying. Historians still argue whether these practices were actually widespread or simply the product of a few Victorian eccentrics with too much time, too many candles, and not enough supervision. But ticket-based divination became a thing. For some, it was playful. For others, deadly serious. Then there were the symbols. Some tickets included subtle iconography, arrows, crosses, or stars, not always as part of the design, but as marks added by conductors or clerks. And in the hands of a superstitious traveler, those little doodles took on meaning. A star might mean good fortune. A checkmark by your name. Possible warning. Even the color of the ticket mattered. Deep red. Passion or danger. Soft blue. Calm journey. Pale yellow. Illness. You'd be amazed how many passengers refused to ride on yellow tickets during flu season. And the fringe gets fringier. There's a lesser-known belief among certain French spiritualists in the 1880s that a used ticket, tucked into the pages of a Bible, could absorb divine protection. Some went so far as to collect ticket stubs from accident-free journeys and store them like relics. They believed that carrying enough of these safe journey tickets could form a protective spiritual armor. Honestly, who needs seat belts when you've got a pocketful of ghost-proof cardstock? Rail companies, predictably, did not endorse this. But some took advantage. A few entrepreneurial printers began including faint floral or celestial motifs on the backs of tickets. Harmless decoration, they said. But those in the know, they whispered that those patterns were sigils. Quiet blessings. Good luck charms snuck past the bureaucrats. One curious tale from 1891 tells of a conductor on the Caledonian Railway who allegedly gave out blessed tickets on full moons. They were regular fare, but passengers swore the paper felt warmer, that the print shimmered faintly under gaslight. When asked, he just smiled and said, "Some journeys ask for more than steam." Of course, not everyone was on board with this woo-woo ticket nonsense. Plenty of passengers rolled their eyes and chalked it all up to the usual Victorian blend of hysteria and too many leeches. But even skeptics couldn't deny that tickets felt significant. They weren't just transactions. They were invitations to transition, physically, yes, but also emotionally. You weren't just moving from town to town. You were crossing thresholds, beginning chapters, saying goodbyes. And in a world where life was fragile, travel was risky, and paper was precious, a beautifully designed, carefully printed ticket felt like it meant something. It was a talisman, a contract with fate. One last quirky twist. Some passengers used tickets as apology notes. They'd scribble a quick line on the back, "I shouldn't have said that. Meet me at 6. And hand it to a traveling companion. It wasn't just about the message. It was about choosing the right paper. Something delicate, personal. And maybe, if you believed in that sort of thing, blessed. You flip your own ticket over again. It's clean now. Just cream cardstock and a fine dusting of coal soot. But for a second, you wonder if someone years from now found this on the floor of a forgotten train car, would they think it held a secret? Would they wonder what you were hoping for? Or who you were becoming when the wheels started to turn? Because sometimes, even a rectangle of cardstock can feel like a portal. A ritual. A little slice of magic folded between timetables and twilight. The carriage hums softly now, a lullaby of groaning timber and hissing valves. A faint vibration tickles through your boots as the train accelerates into the open countryside. You lean back, breathing in the peculiar mix of leather, coal, and lavender perfume lingering from someone 2 seats over. It's all very elegant, very composed. But then you glance down at a fellow passenger's ticket and realize something odd. It's green. Not just a pale green, but a thick, almost mossy cardstock. Your own ticket is rose pink. Someone else flashes a sunshine yellow stub. For a moment it feels like a mismatched deck of playing cards, or a very committed rainbow. But these colors aren't random. Not at all. Because in the 19th century, color was class. Literally. Back then, train tickets weren't just printed, they were dyed. And every hue told a story. The moment you handed over your fare and accepted your stub, the ticket in your palm signaled exactly where you stood in society's hierarchy. A pink ticket might mark you as a second-class passenger. Pale green, third class. Gold-trimmed cream, first class. Darling, enjoy your tea and immunity from eye contact. And it wasn't just about class. Color could convey your gender, your destination, even your likely body odor. Third-class carriages were infamously unventilated. These color codes weren't standard across all railways. Each company developed its own chromatic logic, and passengers were expected to know, or at least pretend to. One line used purple for sleeper cars. Another used red exclusively for male clerks. The London and North Western even trialled a system where unmarried women traveling alone were issued tickets printed on sky blue card. Officially, it was for safety identification. Unofficially, it was Victorian for "please keep the creeps away." Historians still argue whether this gender-based coloring was progressive for its time or just another way to box women into polite corners. Spoiler, it's both. It's always both. And here's the really strange part, people liked it. There was a certain visual pleasure in knowing, at a glance, who belonged where. Not necessarily in a snobbish way, though there was plenty of that. But more in the way a theatre-goer might appreciate the costumed tiers of an opera hall. Even before you stepped onto the train, the ticket in your hand shaped the expectations. A maroon ticket meant plush seats and fresh upholstery. A mustard yellow stub. Brace yourself for wooden benches and someone's goat chewing your coat hem. But color didn't just reinforce the social order. It also helped manage crowds. In busy stations, where thousands of passengers surged like confused ants every hour, colored tickets made it easier for staff to funnel people where they needed to go. Guards didn't have to squint at tiny text. They just needed to flash their eyes over the spectrum and direct accordingly. One fringe practice: color shepherding. Some stations stationed spotters at boarding gates whose entire job was to call out directions based on ticket color. Green to platform 4. Pink follow me. Blue wrong side. Love. It worked surprisingly well, unless it rained. Wet dye plus frantic travelers often led to chaotic smears, ruined tickets, and the occasional fistfight between equally confused strangers both insisting they were the rightful owners of a magenta stub. And the rail companies? They leaned into it. Some began producing lush ticket charts with color swatches, like some bizarre train-themed Pantone guide. These were often framed and hung in station offices, and collectors today still swoon over the surviving examples, faded but glorious, like sun-bleached rainbows from a sootier time. There was also a growing cultural literacy around ticket colors. Victorian novels occasionally used them as subtle character indicators. A protagonist boarding with a first-class white and gold ticket was clearly refined. A villain with a torn, oily green stub? Trouble. Maybe even a murderer. Let's not even talk about the ominous black tickets handed out for funeral trains. Yes, funeral trains were a thing. We'll get there. But the most human detail? Children. Children loved the colored tickets. For many, it was their first brush with design, an early lesson in visual language. Scrapbooks of the era show tiny hands gluing down stubs in Roigbiv rows, each one labeled in careful cursive. In a world with few toys and even fewer personal treasures, a colored train ticket was precious. Some printers even began experimenting with multicolor gradients, fading from one hue to another, to denote routes with transfers. Others used flecks of color embedded in the cardstock to prevent counterfeiting. One line issued polka-dotted tickets for carnival trains. Historians still argue whether that was festive genius or aesthetic crime. It was festive genius, but also a bit of an eyesore. And don't forget the emotional power of color. One famous anecdote tells of a man in Yorkshire who arrived to board his usual morning train and found his ticket was blue instead of pink. Same fare, same class, but the color shook him. He refused to board, claiming the air feels off today. Hours later, that very train derailed. No one could prove the color switch was intentional, but for decades after, his story was cited as proof that ticket colors knew things people didn't. It became known as the Blue Omen. Of course, for the vast majority of passengers, ticket color was a simple tool. A cue. A silent usher. But for others, it became myth, identity, even rebellion. One suffragette allegedly refused to ever ride with a first-class pink ticket, only third-class green, because she wanted to remain among the people. She signed her letters yours, in suit. Tonight, your own ticket seems to glow faintly in the twilight. A soft coral hue, gentle around the edges, worn where your thumb rests. You glance around. Everyone's ticket is different. Like calling cards in a society that moves too fast to introduce itself. And maybe that's the real magic of the thing. That even a slip of dyed cardboard can say something wordless but true. Where you're going. Who you are. Who they think you are. And in the blur of steam and shadow, that's sometimes more than enough. The train slows as it eases into a sleepy junction, a gentle squeal of metal, the faint clink of couplings adjusting their grip. Outside the window, the The platform is a sleepy arrangement of oil lamps and bundled travelers, their breath curling in the evening air like ghosts. You stay in your seat, watching the bustle from behind the glass, and clutch your ticket a little tighter. Because tonight, we talk about the people who made these tickets. Not the travelers. The printers. You probably haven't spent much time picturing 19th century ticket printing shops, but let me tell you, those places were wild. They were part printworks, part engineering lab, part controlled chaos. Imagine the smell of hot metal, varnish, ink, and boiled tea. A background chorus of mechanical clatter. And in the middle of it all, rows of workers, sleeves rolled up, shouting over the thrum of the machinery. Tickets weren't mass-printed in the digital sense. Each one was a product of sweat, skill, and a rather brilliant invention known as the Edmondson press. We mentioned Thomas Edmondson earlier, the former cabinet maker turned ticketing visionary. His system transformed the rail world. And in the back rooms of ticket offices and specialist printers, his legacy clanked and clicked with near-military precision. So how did it work? First, thick cardstock was dyed the desired color in enormous batches, yes, whole crates of green or red or lavender paper soaking in chemical dyes and hung to dry like damp laundry. Then came the printing. But these weren't sheets. Oh no. The Edmondson system used individual cards, each precisely cut to size. That meant printers had to handle every single one. The presses were typeset by hand, one row of letters at a time. Not just the text, but every number, every destination, every flourish, all fitted into a custom iron frame. If someone misspelled Birmingham or nudged a comma out of place, the whole block had to be reset. It took hours. And this happened constantly. Historians still argue whether printing ticket batches was more like publishing or manufacturing, but everyone agrees it was slow, demanding, exacting. These printers weren't just tradesmen. They were artists with dirty fingers and aching backs. And they knew it. In fact, some left signatures. Tiny, coded initials or press marks hidden in the design under a flourish, tucked in a margin. Not to brag, but to mark. Like a quiet nod saying, I was here. I made this. And then came the numbering. This part required almost meditative focus. Each ticket had a serial number, of course. And these weren't printed randomly. Oh no. They were pressed in sequential order using a special machine with hand-cranked rotating number blocks. Clerks had to align the numbers carefully before each run. Lose count. Print a duplicate. That was grounds for a full stop and a day's worth of paperwork. One fringe story tells of a printer in Derby who accidentally skipped from 89.99 to 90.01. The resulting missing ticket was rumored to have cursed that entire train route, dooming it to delays and frequent pigeon-related accidents. Did the passengers notice? Maybe not. Did the printer lie awake for weeks, haunted by his own numerical sin? Absolutely. Once printed, tickets were sorted, trimmed, and pressed between heavy boards to keep them flat. Then came the final flourish, varnish. A thin, clear coating, brushed or rolled on to protect the print and give it that faint sheen. It wasn't glossy, exactly, more like a waxed envelope or the surface of a ripe apple. Satisfying, subtle, and completely, gloriously over the top. Some tickets were even scented. Yes, scented. Usually by accident, residual traces of the varnish oils, or paper soaked in aromatic linseed or clove before pressing. But occasionally, it was deliberate. One luxury rail company issued first-class tickets with a light lavender fragrance. Another tried lemon oil, which passengers hated, smells like tonic water and poor decisions, wrote one journalist in 1888. The entire ticket-making process was a ballet of inky fingers and iron gears. But it wasn't just about volume. It was about trust. These were financial documents, Remember, essentially cash equivalents. Rail companies had to protect them from forgery, misprints, theft. Some printing rooms were locked tighter than banks. And the printers themselves were vetted, sworn to secrecy about press patterns and security marks. And then, of course, there were the misprints. Oh, the joy of the misprint. A ticket that said London instead of London. Or one with a fare listed as pound 5.00, with the second O actually being a letter, not a number. Collectors love these now. But back then, they were a nightmare. Clerks had to pull the entire stack and start again, grumbling the whole way, probably inventing some colorful 19th century swears in the process. One quirky detail: some printers used secret flourishes as security features. Curled tails on certain letters. Repeating border patterns with one deliberate break. Tiny anchors hidden inside decorative vines. Not because anyone asked for it. Just because they could. It was like a secret language between printers. And if a forger missed the mark, bam! Caught. Denied boarding. Shamed at the ticket counter. You can almost picture them, those print workers hunched over their presses, sleeves rolled, hands black with ink, grinning as another tray of perfect little tickets came off the line. They weren't just building paper. They were shaping experience. They were setting the tone for every journey, one click, clunk, and curl at a time. So tonight, as the train rolls forward and your ticket rests quietly in your palm, remember, it was born in a place of noise and steam and labor. It passed through human hands. Hands that cared. Hands that swore. Hands that took pride in a thing as small and silly as a square inch of printed card. And somehow, that pride made it all the way to you. The train picks up speed again, wheels whispering over the rails in long metallic sighs. You've begun to lose all sense of time. Was that your third stop or your fifth? The countryside is now just a blur of moonlit fields and flickering lanterns in distant cottages. You sit there, ticket still in your lap, and your thumb brushes over the embossed crest in its corner. That raised emblem, that isn't just for show. It's part of the grand, almost theatrical identity war that swept through the rail world, because if there was one thing railway companies loved more than coal and controlling time, it was branding themselves like empires. And nowhere was that branding more prominent than on the tickets themselves. You have to understand, by the mid-1800s, rail companies weren't just transport services. They were titanic forces, semi-mythical behemoths, with names that sounded more like ruling dynasties than businesses: the Great Western, the London and Southeastern, the Grand Trunk, the Caledonian. They carved the country with steel and steam, and they wanted you to know exactly who you were riding with. So they branded everything. Trains, platforms, uniforms, clock faces, luggage tags, even the teacups in the dining cars. But most importantly, they branded the one object every passenger touched: the ticket. Company crests were stamped, embossed, or inked right onto the card, each one a mini masterpiece of Victorian symbolism. Think rampant lions, flaming torches, winged wheels, globes wrapped in serpents, or hammers crossed over laurels. These weren't minimalist logos. They were operatic. The Great Northern Railway, for instance, used a compass surrounded by radiating sunbeams. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. It said, "We are direction. We are order. We are the light in your foggy, punctual little life." And they weren't just graphic design choices. These images were intended to be felt. Literally. Many were embossed with heavy dyes, so you could run your fingers across the design and feel the raised textures. You couldn't mistake one company's ticket for another's. Your fingertips knew the difference before your eyes even caught up. Some passengers developed fierce loyalty to specific crests, like modern sports fans. They'd collect the latest variations, compare embellishments, or argue about whether the new northeastern emblem looked too French. It didn't. But good luck telling that to Reginald from York. What's more, these crests became part of intercompany competition. If one line released a new emblem featuring a crown surrounded by steam clouds, the rival company might answer with an even larger emblem, maybe one with a crowned eagle riding a steam cloud. Subtlety was not the vibe. Historians still argue whether these branding wars actually influenced ticket sales or were just expensive exercises in graphic machismo. But for the passengers, the symbolism mattered. Your ticket wasn't just proof of purchase, it was a tiny, pocket-sized passport into a railway's vision of the future. A future of progress, of speed, of respectability. And some companies took this very, very seriously. One railway, the Southeastern and Chatham, went so far as to update its ticket crest twice a year, adjusting the banner lettering to match the season. In spring, the font became lighter, more floral. In winter, the lines grew sharper, bolder, like ice etched in brass, according to one overenthusiastic clerk's memoirs. Others experimented with commemorative emblems, special designs issued only on certain days. A ticket printed with a wreath and dove might be sold on Christmas Eve. A flame and cogwheel for New Year's. One railway even offered a heart and ribbon crest on Valentine's Day for couples traveling together. Of course, if you were alone and accidentally got handed one of those, well, let's just say your compartment might have felt a little chillier. But branding went beyond just the crests. Fonts were part of the equation too, remember? And so were borders, layouts, even the shape of the ticket corners. One famously pretentious line rounded their corners to prevent the tearing of delicate gloves, which was code for "we cater to rich people." Another company kept their stubs completely square, proudly claiming, "A real railway leaves the corners on." And then there were regional accents in design. Scottish railway tickets, often darker in colour, with thicker borders and more austere fonts, visual echoes of granite and snow and no-nonsense schedules. Southern lines favoured lighter pastels, sweeping typefaces, and delicate flourishes. Like someone trying to woo you into a journey with tea and handwritten poetry. Even the thickness of the paper could be a branding move. Heavier cardstock implied reliability, stability, class. Flimsier tickets were cheaper to produce but carried the unfortunate association of unreliability. One satirical pamphlet in 1867 joked, "You may tell a railway's character by the density of its pulp." There was even an unspoken hierarchy in ticket feel. Crisp edges meant care. Fuzzy, overcut corners meant chaos. And woe to the passenger who tried to use a misaligned ticket at a posh terminus. You might as well have shown up barefoot. But perhaps the most curious detail in all of this branding frenzy, some railways printed slogans directly onto their tickets. Tiny mottos. A line of reassurance, pride, or occasionally smugness. The punctual line. Fast. Fair. Fearless. Comfort at 50 miles an hour. And in one memorably pompous example, where time bows to steam. They weren't just for marketing. These slogans reflected a genuine belief that railway companies were the future, and not just of travel, but of civilization. Riding their line wasn't just about getting somewhere. It was an experience, a declaration, a statement that you were part of something modern, efficient, proper. And the ticket in your hand? That was your membership card. So tonight, as the train carries you forward into whatever quiet town or dream-soaked city awaits, glance again at the emblem on your stub. That lion or wheel or torch isn't just a logo. It's a stamp of pride. A whisper of history. A reminder that even in a world full of soot, noise, and delays, someone still believed a train ride could be elegant. It's properly dark now, the windows reflecting your own sleepy face more than anything outside. Town lights blink past occasionally brief, glowing interruptions in the blackness. The train rattles forward, unbothered by night, and your hand still rests on your ticket, worn now at the corners, a little curled, like it's been alive this whole time. But tonight, you find yourself thinking not about the passengers or the printers or the logos. You start thinking about the tickets that never made it. The ones no one ever held. Because for every beautifully inked and punched little masterpiece, there were stacks, sometimes whole crates, of discarded, cancelled, or destroyed tickets. And yes, that too was a carefully managed part of the system. In the bustling 19th century railway economy, unissued tickets were as much of a liability as a misfired cannon. You see, these weren't just little slips of paper. They were, effectively, cash. If you stole a box of blank tickets from a train office and knew how to fill them out, you could ride for free, or worse, sell them. So companies developed elaborate systems to control, track, and eventually destroy their unused stock. Think fireproof ticket safes, brass-numbered ticket drawers, and monthly audits so detailed they would make modern accountants weep. One popular method of disposal? The ticket guillotine. Yes, that's what they called it. A heavy iron lever with a razor-sharp blade, designed specifically to decapitate stacks of tickets. The goal wasn't to shred them into confetti, no, we're still in the 1800s, we've got style. The goal was to slice a corner off cleanly, rendering the ticket invalid but still legible for the record books. Some clerks developed real flair with the thing, flicking the blade down with the panache of a stage magician. One fringe report tells of a ticket master in Kent who could slice through 1,000 stubs in an hour with a rhythm so steady the staff nicknamed him the metronome. He reportedly kept a tally of every ticket he ever guillotined. The final count? Over 2 million. And yet, not every cancelled ticket met such a grim end. Some were repurposed, turned into station notepaper, scrap pads, or even currency within the railway itself. One small Welsh line used old tickets as makeshift tokens for employee lunches. Present 2 green stubs at the kitchen and you got a pie. 3 stubs. The good pie. Others were saved archived, in fact, by obsessively organized clerks who bound them in ledgers by month, route, and fare. These weren't for nostalgia. They were for auditing. Inspectors could trace irregularities by following the trail of printed and issued numbers. If ticket number 348921 was supposed to be sold to Swansea but turned up used in Brighton, well, someone had explaining to do. Historians still argue whether this obsessive cataloguing prevented fraud or just created the illusion of control. Either way, the ledgers survive. You can still find them in some museums, thick books filled with neat rows of colored cards, labeled in tidy Victorian handwriting. Little graveyards of never-used journeys. But while some tickets met bureaucratic fates, others lived on. Illegally. Enter the world of the railway scavenger. These were often children, scrappy, wide-eyed, and faster than most adults. They'd sneak around station bins, waiting rooms, and platforms collecting discarded stubs. Not for any noble purpose. For games. For trading. For pure, unfiltered childhood mischief. They'd build castles out of ticket stacks. Use the color coding to invent imaginary economies. In some neighborhoods, red tickets were worth 5 green ones. Pink ones got you 2 marbles and a boiled sweet. One boy's memoir recounts a game called Railway Empire, where kids tried to collect tickets from every station in London, no actual travel required. Just patience, sticky fingers, and a complete disregard for sanitation. Some children even faked journeys with these found tickets, writing fictional destinations or scribbling over the fare and trying to bluff their way onto trains. Conductors, naturally, did not find this charming. There are recorded incidents of station guards confiscating entire handfuls of forged or recycled stubs from gangs of grubby little entrepreneurs. And yet, some adults did the same. There's a slightly shady history of ticket reuse, especially during economic downturns. Unscrupulous passengers would carefully steam open the punch marks to soften the card, flatten the paper, and try to make the stub look fresh. In some cases, they'd paint over the punched hole with watercolor and restamp it. Not very convincing, especially when the conductor punched it again and hit nothing but soggy lies. One woman in 1882 was caught with a single third-class ticket that had been used, repainted, and resealed 11 times. When questioned, she reportedly replied, "It's like a good hat. Still perfectly serviceable." Of course, the companies didn't find that funny. Eventually, some railways began printing void patterns on expired or cancelled tickets. These patterns couldn't be erased or patched over. In extreme cases, companies added a kind of fine sandpaper coating on the back to prevent glue or alterations. Others started including expiration dates, printed in miniature near the fare, an early form of the modern valid until system. But even with all these precautions, stray tickets still made it out into the world. Which brings us to the oddest subculture of all, ticket artists. Yes, they existed. Individuals who took discarded stubs and turned them into collages, mosaics, bookmarks, even wearable art. One painter in Leeds made portraits entirely from cut-up third-class tickets, including an eerie self-portrait titled "The Passenger." Another covered his entire wall with pale blue stubs arranged by tone. He called it the wall of everywhere I didn't go. These ticket remnants, born for precision and order, became the stuff of dreams. Carriers of potential. Silent reminders of paths not taken. And maybe that's why we still find them haunting. Because every unused ticket is a miniature what if. A sliver of a story never written. A quiet invitation that went unanswered. So you look at your own stub again, soft around the edges, its corner slightly bent from your pocket, and you wonder, what would have happened if you hadn't boarded tonight? What piece of paper would have taken your place? What story would have been lost? And just like that, you're glad this ticket wasn't guillotined. That it was used. That you're here, watching it age softly under your fingers as the train glides on into darkness. A gentle jolt hums through the floorboards as the train crosses an old bridge, iron girders overhead casting flickering shadows like ribs over your seat. You glance down at your feet, then at the stub still in your hand. It's been with you for hours now. Folded, thumbed, punched. A tiny rectangle that survived soot, sweat, and snack crumbs. And suddenly, you wonder, what happens to your ticket after the ride? Because in the 19th century, your journey didn't end when the train stopped. No, not at all. In fact, for many passengers, the final ritual wasn't stepping onto the platform, it was surrendering your ticket to a rather grim little contraption known as the ticket box. These boxes were mounted on walls or pedestals at station exits. Made of iron or heavy wood, they had narrow slots, too thin to fish anything back out, and inside? Darkness. Oblivion. The echoey thud of dozens of tickets tumbling into a paper grave. You'd drop yours in, perhaps with a glance back, as if saying goodbye to a friend. And that was that. Some travelers hated this. After all, tickets were lovely things, beautifully printed, personalized with numbers, sometimes even scented or crested. For many, they were souvenirs. Mementos. But no, the system was clear. Unless it was specifically marked passenger to retain, the ticket had to go in the box. No exceptions. Not even for sentimental poets or nervous first-timers hoping to save it for their scrapbook. And if you tried to sneak out with one, oh boy! Station inspectors were trained to watch for that exact maneuver, the hasty pocket slip, the fake drop. Getting caught could earn you a fine or a lecture or, at best, a stern look that made you feel 7 years old again. Historians still argue whether this strictness was about recycling, record-keeping, or simply control. Likely all three. The tickets, once collected, were sorted into bags, sometimes by class or route, and sent back to administrative centers. There, clerks would count them, reconcile fares, and make sure no one had, say, pocketed 1,000 unsurrendered stubs and sold them off-platform like some underground railway scalper. But here's the twist. Not all tickets ended up in the box. Not all were forgotten. Because slowly, quietly, people began collecting them. At first, it was casual. A child kept their first journey stub. A soldier saved one from the train that took him to basic training. A young couple pressed theirs into a photo album next to a fading sepia kiss. But soon, it became something more, a hobby, a passion, an obsession. Enter the rail ticket collectors. These weren't board stamp nerds or fussy retirees, at least not at first. They were adventurers, romantics, pattern chasers. They saw something in those little bits of card that the railway companies didn't. Life, movement, story. And they wanted to capture it. By the 1880s, amateur collectors had begun trading stubs like baseball cards. First by color, then by company, then by rare printings, discontinued routes, punch patterns, even printing errors. A ticket with a double-punched corner or an upside-down crest. Worth twice as much. Some began organizing them chronologically. Others arranged by geography, building entire visual maps from ticket stacks. One man in Norfolk lined his study walls with ticket strips, forming a massive, multicolored diagram of every journey he'd ever taken. He called it his paper biography. Still others leaned artistic. They glued tickets into collages, pinwheeled them into decorative rosettes, or bound them into tiny books with leather covers and gold lettering. Journeys 1879 to 1882. There's a surviving example of one of these books in a museum in York. Its final page is blank, with just the words, "Next trip, undecided." And then came the competitions. Rail enthusiast societies began hosting ticket contests, awarding ribbons for the rarest finds or the most beautifully preserved examples. Some collectors became minor celebrities in train-spotting circles. Have you seen Eugenia's Highland Express 1866? Impeccable edges. Mint condition. Smells faintly of pine tar and romance. It sounds a little silly now, sure. But remember, this was an era before selfies, before luggage tags, before even reliable photography. Your ticket was the proof. The memory. The mark of having gone and returned. And some people went further still. There are verified cases of forged tickets created not to ride illegally, but to complete a collection. One man is known to have painstakingly recreated dozens of missing stubs using old press templates and hand-mixed dies. Not to scam anyone. Just to hold the history he couldn't find. Eventually, rail companies caught wind of all this collecting and did what any self-respecting 19th century corporation would do: they capitalized on it. Some began issuing special edition tickets. These were commemorative runs for major events, coronations, anniversaries, new line openings. Printed on colored foil paper, embossed with gold, or even issued in strange shapes: oval tickets, triangle tickets, one that looked like a violin. Others created souvenir tickets, marked not for travel, sold in gift shops or handed out on ceremonial rides. A famous example, the 1893 Crystal Palace Express ticket, printed on translucent vellum with silver ink. Absolutely useless for boarding. Impossibly beautiful. And somewhere along the line, people started collecting not for nostalgia, but for status. You see, a ticket wasn't just a memory. It was proof of access. A record of where you'd been, who you'd sat beside, what kind of carriage you'd ridden in. A rare first-class stub from a now-defunct route. Instant social currency. Something you could casually display next to your smoking pipe and say, "Ah, yes. Took that one to Scarborough. Smoked a cigar with a duke." Or possibly a baker pretending to be a duke. Either way, lovely trip. And maybe that's the lasting power of the railway ticket. It's not just a square of paper. It's a passport to memory. A badge of travel. A tiny, tangible reminder that you moved across landscapes, between moments, through life itself. That for a few hours, you were part of something larger. Something loud and smoky and thrilling. So tonight, as the train glides into the next dark patch of countryside and your thumb absently smooths the ticket's corner again, you wonder if you'll keep this one. Tuck it into a book. Press it into your journal. Or maybe let it tumble into the station box like so many others. Either way, the journey is written now. And the paper remembers. The train shudders slightly as it begins a slow, curving turn. Somewhere outside, a bell rings faintly in the dark, a signal box, maybe, or a distant crossing. Inside your carriage, most passengers have dozed off. A few hold books loosely, their pages fluttering with the motion. You sit quietly, your ticket still in hand, and suddenly you wonder, who made the rules? I mean, not just the rules of conduct, but the weird, fiddly ones. The shapes. The timing. The punctures. Because these little slips of card, decorative as they were, had a whole universe of standardized systems governing them. And some of them were frankly bizarre. Welcome to the wild world of railway ticket regulations. Let's start with the punch marks. Every railway issued its ticket inspectors a specific handheld punch, essentially a small metal device, not unlike a hole puncher crossed with a nutcracker. But here's the fun part. Each punch created a distinctive shape. Not just circles. There were stars, crescents, diamonds, hearts, even anchors, and tiny trains. One line used an acorn shape, for reasons no one remembers. The point of these shapes? Authentication. You handed your ticket to the conductor, who gave it a satisfying clunk, punching a shape through the paper. This wasn't just a receipt, it was a timestamp, an official "you were here" mark. And more importantly, each unique punch shape could identify which inspector had punched it and when. In theory, this made fraud more difficult. In practice, it mostly made things adorable. Some passengers collected punch shapes the way others collected stamps. Kids would beg inspectors for a fancy punch, and occasionally get a cheeky smile and a triple punch ticket. Conductors had contests among themselves for best accuracy, who could punch the dead center of the fare box, who could notch the corner without tearing it. One inspector in Cornwall was famous for his butterfly-shaped punch, and passengers considered it a good luck charm. Historians still argue whether these custom punch marks were functional, ceremonial, or just the result of Victorian whimsy gone unchecked. Probably all three. But beyond the punch, there were unwritten etiquette rules, too. For instance, you never read your ticket aloud. That was gauche. The ticket was meant to be shown, not spoken. It was a quiet agreement between you and the system. Hand it over. Get it punched. Move on. Also, folding the ticket? Absolutely not. That was considered sloppy. Some stations even had signs requesting passengers present tickets uncreased and clearly. There was a whole posture to it, holding it by the top corner, thumb on the back, fingers just barely touching the edge, like you were offering a leaf to a nervous deer. Ticket size, too, was strictly regulated. Edmondson's original template, 1 1/8 by 2 1/4 inches, became the industry gold standard. Big enough to print essential details. Small enough to fit in a wallet or waistcoat pocket. Try to go bigger. It didn't fit the sorting drawers. Too small? You'd lose it in a breeze. But there were exceptions. Some routes used elongated tickets for longer journeys, sort of like train boarding passes. Others went wide, like tiny index cards. And then there were the vertical tickets, printed tall rather than long, often used on scenic tourist lines. They looked like bookmarks and usually featured tiny landscape illustrations, waterfalls, mountains, cliffside stations. You didn't even need to ride the train. People bought the ticket just for the art. Which brings us to illustrated tickets. These were a late 19th century indulgence, usually issued for seasonal routes or holiday specials. Imagine a stub printed with a tiny lithograph of snowy peaks or seaside piers. One famous winter route from London to the Lake District issued tickets with little sledding scenes on them. Another had a holly border and a printed message, wishing you a swift and sootless journey. Not every railway loved these flourishes. Some saw them as gimmicks. But others leaned in hard, especially when it came to courting wealthy passengers or international tourists. It was ticketing as hospitality, really. A visual hello. And the text on the ticket? That was a whole other battlefield. Different companies preferred different terminology. Some printed third class, others third class. Some spelled out return, while others used abbreviations like RTN or DR 4-day return. There were debates over whether the fare should appear on the front, bold, transparent, democratic, or hidden on the back, tasteful, discreet, upper class. A few lines even printed poetry. Yes, poetry. One famous excursion ticket to Brighton read, "From city's grime to ocean breeze. This card shall carry you with ease. Present it firm and clear of fold. For one-way dreams or travels bold." Was it good poetry? No. But did it make the ride feel like an adventure? Absolutely. And then there were the strange codes. To the casual traveler, the corner of a ticket might display a cluster of letters and numbers that meant nothing. GNR 8 WEDM 15B. But to the staff, it was a complete logistical signature. Line, route variation, printing batch, even day of issuance. A conductor could glance at those characters and know if the stub had come from a secondary printing press, a replacement batch, or, heaven forbid, a rival company's drawer. One quirky regulation: tickets had to be printed with enough ink to be readable in low gaslight. A surprisingly tricky standard, since too much ink smudged, and too little disappeared entirely. So printers developed a technique called cloud rolling, brushing a thin grey ink layer beneath the main text to make it pop in dim light. Basically, Victorian drop shadowing. Graphic designers today would be proud. There was even a rule against perfuming tickets. Apparently, one ambitious station manager in Birmingham began spraying all first-class tickets with rosewater before handing them out. He claimed it made passengers feel gentled. Management disagreed strongly. They cited unnecessary cost and risk of ink bleed. The practice was banned by Christmas. But of all the regulations, perhaps the most oddly touching was this: the final punch. On many rural lines, it was traditional for a conductor to punch the ticket a second time, just before you disembarked, marking it as completed. It wasn't strictly necessary, but it gave a sense of closure. A gentle punctuation mark. A reminder that your journey had an end, and it had been witnessed. So tonight, if someone reaches for your ticket as you approach a station, if they give it one last clink with a worn metal punch, you'll know what it means. It means you were seen. You were part of the machine. And even now, long after the ink has faded and the paper's worn soft from your fingers, you belonged. The train slows just slightly, as if catching its breath, gliding past a field where nothing stirs but a slow-turning windmill. A cluster of sheep glance up, unfazed by the midnight express. You, on the other hand, are very much awake now, curled in your seat, clutching that little relic of a ticket. And in this quiet stretch of track, you start to think not about rules or art or color. You start to think about power. Because, for all their prettiness, these little tickets once carried enormous weight. They weren't just paper, they were permission. Access. A statement of who you were allowed to be, and where you were allowed to go. In the 19th century, Rail travel was not the great equalizer. It was a ladder, and your ticket told everyone exactly where you stood. Let's talk about class. Every ticket, no matter how decorative or well punched, declared your social position in clean, unsympathetic type. First class. Second class. Third. Sometimes even fourth, though that term got retired pretty quickly for sounding a bit too Dickensian, even for the Victorians. The distinctions were more than just symbolic. They were embodied in the carriages themselves. First-class cars were padded, curtained, well-lit, and warmly heated. You'd be offered newspapers, water, maybe even biscuits if the steward was feeling generous. Your fellow travelers wore monocles, carried canes, and discussed empire over the soft rustle of leather gloves. Your ticket would reflect that. Heavy paper, embossed edges, maybe even a gold leaf crest if you were lucky or important. Second class? Less velvet, more wood. Cushions, yes, but no steward. Fewer amenities. More elbow contact with strangers. Third class was wood. Just wood. Bare benches, no cushioning, no lighting, sometimes no roof in the early days. And those tickets? Thinner, plainer, ink that sometimes smudged in the rain. No flourish. No poetry. Just a destination and a number, and a general sense that you were lucky to be going anywhere at all. Historians still argue whether the class divisions in railway travel reflected existing social orders or helped reinforce them. Either way, there was no hiding who you were. Your ticket broadcasted it. And if you tried to cross the boundary, heavens! Woe betide the third-class passenger who wandered into a first-class car by mistake. Conductors were trained to spot this from a distance. They'd glance at your stub, raise an eyebrow, and guide you gently but firmly back to your designated woodplank realm. One satirical pamphlet described it as being ushered from the parlor to the barn. There were even different ticket windows. First-class passengers purchased their tickets in quieter, better appointed rooms, sometimes with velvet ropes and uniformed clerks. Third-class travelers lined up outside in the rain, beneath faded signage and questionable awnings. The physical separation mirrored the metaphorical one. Some things never change, huh? But there was a shift on the horizon. As the century rolled on, certain rail companies began to question the usefulness of such rigid divisions. The economics weren't adding up. First-class compartments were often half empty, while third-class overflowed. Reformers began calling out the disparities. And in 1875, something remarkable happened. A few rail lines began upgrading third class. It started quietly. A few more inches of cushion. Better lighting. A coat hook. Nothing extravagant, just a nod toward basic human comfort. And guess what? Tickets followed suit. They got thicker. Cleaner. Some even gained little decorative touches. A border. A nicer font. The suggestion that maybe, just maybe, you mattered. There's a particularly lovely anecdote from 1883, a third-class ticket printed in teal ink on buff paper, with a small embossed star in the corner. A clerk asked the printer why. Because, the printer said, sometimes the poor go home for weddings. Still, resistance remained. Some companies clung to class like a badge of honor. A railway director was once asked why he refused to improve third class. His response: because if we made it comfortable, they'd have no reason to pay more. That quote haunted reformers for decades. Eventually, second class vanished entirely, folded up and absorbed into first or third, depending on the route. The in-between space disappeared. But the tickets remembered. 4 years after, stubs would still be labeled second out of habit, confusing clerks and collectors alike. One fringe story claims that for a full decade after the change, a single station in Cornwall kept printing second-class tickets by mistake, simply because the press manager had a soft spot for the font. No one corrected him. No one really minded. The tickets still worked. Meanwhile, some tickets began to adopt euphemisms. Instead of third class, you'd see ordinary, or economy, or standard terms designed to soften the blow. But everyone still knew. The paper felt different. The punch was plainer. The respect, a little more strained. Still, there was beauty even in the lowest tier. Some third-class tickets were printed in rich, bold colors, crimson, navy, deep green, partly for visibility, but also because someone in the print room thought it mattered. You'll never know their name. But they held that stub in their ink-stained fingers and said, "Why not make it nice?" And that's the strange truth. For all the hierarchy and division and social fuss, tickets equalized everyone eventually. Because whether you stepped off into a chandelier-lit lobby or trudged out into a muddy side platform, your journey was the same length. Your ticket had been punched by the same cold tool. And at the end of the day, it wound up in the same dark box. So tonight, as you lean back and the train sways slightly beneath you, take a moment to glance again at that stub. Not as a label, not as a status symbol, but as a shared object, one held by rich and poor, proud and meek, polished and travel-worn alike. Paper doesn't care who holds it. It just carries you. You feel the weight of the journey now, not the physical weight, though your legs might be stiff and your eyelids a little heavy, but the quiet, cumulative weight of the stories folded into the folds of that ticket in your hand. Outside, the world passes in softened streaks of grey and dark green. Inside, the rhythm of the train lulls everything into a gentle hush. But your mind's still buzzing, following the threads of something strange. What about the tickets that never should have existed? Ah yes, welcome to the delicious world of railway ticket errors and oddities. Because for all the order and standardization, the railway industry was still run by fallible, soot-smudged human hands. And sometimes, those hands printed things they absolutely did not mean to. And when they did, oh, the collectors rejoiced. Let's start with the classic, misprints. These came in all flavors. Swapped digits. Misspelled stations. Wrong class marked. A ticket from London to Shrewsbury. Or better still, a third-class fare with first class accidentally printed in bold on top. Some passengers caught the mistake and rode gleefully in luxury for the price of a loaf of bread. Others didn't notice at all. Which is honestly very on-brand for 19th century rail travel. Then there were the upside-down stubs, tickets printed with half the type inverted, so you'd flip it around like a confused magician, trying to figure out which end was up. A few legendary examples included mirrored layouts, misaligned punches, and one truly cursed edition where the paper was inserted backward, printing everything on the wrong side. One inspector apparently stared at a reverse ticket so long, he forgot which station he was in and had to be guided back by a porter. Historians still argue whether these errors were truly accidental or if, in some cases, print operators let a few oddities slip through just for the collectors. After all, by the 1880s, the ticket collecting craze was in full swing, and demand for rarities was intense. A misprinted ticket wasn't just a mistake, it was a treasure. There was even a black market for them. Shady ticket agents and train clerks occasionally hoarded misprints or spoiled runs, then sold them on to eager collectors at premium prices. A batch of third class, to nowhere tickets reportedly went for more than a week's wages at one London auction in 1892. The kicker: nowhere wasn't a real destination. The ink had simply bled over a half-erased town name. But the myth had already taken root. And then there were the phantom tickets. Every once in a while, a ticket would be printed for a journey that no longer existed. A defunct branch line. A station that had closed due to flooding or fire. One ticket in a museum shows a route from Grimley Hollow to East Dunsfold. Trouble is, No historical evidence supports the existence of either station. Historians suspect it may have been a clerical error, or a test run, or, just maybe, a printing prank played by board staff on a foggy Tuesday morning. And oh, the fare anomalies. Imagine buying a ticket labeled First Class, 0D. That's 0 pence. Completely free. One such specimen exists, a gold-toned ticket issued by the Midland Railway for a free rider day, although whether that day actually occurred is unclear. Another ticket, perhaps more tragically, charged double the normal fare by mistake, leading to a minor station riot involving 17 disgruntled clergymen and one very confused goat. And speaking of goats, there's a confirmed example of an animal ticket. Issued in 1887 by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, it read, 1 goat, 3rd class, livestock car. The fare was 1 shilling and 4pence. The goat's name? Unrecorded. But the stub survives, delicately inscribed in calligraphy more elegant than most wedding invitations. This led to a whole genre of non-human tickets. Dogs. Chickens. One time, a swan. All printed with standard formats, as though the passengers might nod politely and present them at the carriage door. Some railway lines even had small ticket versions about half the size for animals under £50. Apparently, size did matter. Then there were the joke tickets, unofficial stubs printed by enterprising pranksters or novelty shops. Tickets to the end of the line, or platform 10 3/4. One notorious example allowed uninterrupted travel from your problems to a better life. That ticket, now framed in a private collection, has a large tear across the destination. Make of that what you will. Of course, companies didn't love all this chaos. Some tried to clamp down, introducing rigorous proofreading, error logs, even limited printing runs to reduce the odds of anomalies. But the collectors were always watching, always hoping, and every now and then, something slipped through. Something perfect. One of the most sought-after ticket oddities today is a stub printed for a train that never existed, overnight express to Windermere via Sundale. No record exists of such a route. No timetable. No schedule. But the ticket was real, printed in navy ink, stamped, and punched. Some believe it was part of a proposed route that was cancelled last minute. Others whisper it was a test for a royal train that never ran. The truth? Still unknown. But maybe that's the point. Because these little paper slips, meant to regulate and record, also became portals to imagination. The errors, the oddities, the phantom fares, they became invitations to dream. What if you could board a train to nowhere? What if a goat really did share your compartment? What if your stub, by accident or magic, took you somewhere off the map? And sitting here tonight, as the train glides through another nameless patch of English night, you realize, maybe every ticket has that power. Even the perfect ones. Especially the perfect ones. Because travel isn't just about arrival. It's about possibility, mystery, surprise. So hold on to that ticket. Folded, aged, slightly smudged. Maybe it'll be your mistake. Your misprint. Your ride to somewhere unexpected. And if someone ever finds it years from now, tucked in a book or slipped behind a dresser, they'll wonder, where were they going? Did they make it? And maybe they'll wish they had gone too. The hum of the rails deepens, slower now, rounder, like the train is settling into its own exhale. Your head leans against the window, cold glass anchoring your thoughts as the stars above smear across the sky. The ticket in your hand is soft now, warm from your fingers, the ink dulled but still legible. You don't even read it anymore, you feel it. And somehow, it feels like a key. But a key to what? Tonight, you slip through that question like smoke and find yourself in the strange and secret world of railway ticket rituals. No, not just etiquette rituals. Tiny personal habits. quirky superstitions, and the bizarre little meanings people attached to these small rectangles of paper over decades of travel and change. Because for something so simple, the 19th century railway ticket became a talisman, a psychological anchor in a time of immense motion. Let's start with a classic, the pre-boarding ritual. In most cities, you'd see it outside any major station, the nervous cluster of travelers standing just to the side of the ticket office, examining their stubs like sacred scrolls. They'd run their thumb along the paper edge, double-check the date, flip it front and back, then back again, as if the destination might change mid-glance. Some passengers took this further. One strange but oddly common ritual involved kissing the ticket, usually once before boarding, and once just after finding a seat. Not romantic kissing, just a brief press of the lips, like sealing a pact. For some, it was habit. For others, a genuine charm against disaster. Better to kiss the card than kiss the sky, one old Yorkshire traveller once said. That line eventually made its way onto a limited-run holiday ticket in 1894. Printed in gold. Sold out within a week. Then there were the arrival rites. Certain seasoned passengers swore you had to tear your ticket in half the moment your feet touched the platform, left foot first, always. It was a symbolic gesture. The journey was over, the spell was broken, the paper no longer held power. Others believed in the opposite. Never destroy the ticket until you're safely home. Rip it on the train, and the line might take you back, one superstition went. Historians still argue whether these customs emerged organically from oral tradition or were stoked by railway companies to discourage stub hoarding. There's some evidence that early conductors reinforced certain behaviors, pressing a ticket to the forehead for luck, folding it a certain way to avoid tears, even tapping it 3 times against the seat before departure. Ridiculous? Sure. But try riding a 19th century locomotive at full speed with no seatbelt and a 5-minute stop time and not reach for a ritual. Some rituals were more tactile. Many travelers developed habits of stroking the ticket's edge with a single finger while riding. A way to calm nerves. To stay anchored during the long, swaying hours of motion. Others preferred to fold and refold the stub into tiny origami shapes, triangles, boats, even hearts. Conductors hated this. Naturally, it rendered the ticket unreadable and impossible to punch properly, but some passengers simply couldn't stop. It was their anxiety valve, their fidget spinner, their control in a world of steam and noise. Then you had the farewell rituals. If you were waving off a loved one, you might ask to keep their ticket stub. Just a piece of them. Something warm from their coat pocket to tuck under your pillow. This was especially common during wartime mobilizations, wives keeping their husbands' tickets like holy relics. Proof his coming back, one woman reportedly whispered, clutching a red-edged return fare to Oxford. He did. In other cases, stubs were returned, left carefully on a fireplace mantel, slid under a door, mailed back with a note, "I arrived safe." The ticket as message, as heartbeat, as unspoken "I love you." More eccentric travelers turned the ticket into a game. One gentleman in 1888 kept a notebook titled Ticket Tales. For every ride, he'd write a short story inspired by the names printed on the stub. Sometimes it was romance. Kettering to Blissworth became a doomed affair. Other times horror, Midnight Express to Gravesend, no elaboration needed. He completed over 300 such entries before his death. The notebook now sits in a museum archive in Bath, mostly unread, but deeply adored. And then there were the gifted tickets. These were special, rare. To receive a ticket from someone else, handed to you, rather than bought for yourself, was considered deeply meaningful. Especially if it was one they'd already used. Some couples even treated it like a promise ring. "This took me to you. Now it's yours." Others passed them between generations. Fathers to sons. Mothers to daughters. A worn stub folded into a locket. A ticket to something more than a destination. There are stories, whispers, really, of tickets passed along anonymously. Left on benches. Slipped between pages of library books. Hidden in coat pockets. A stranger's passage offered to the next traveler. No note. No explanation. Just a stub and a possibility. A ride someone hoped you'd take. And sometimes, the ritual wasn't in the action. It was in the ticket itself. Some passengers insisted on always buying blue tickets, even if cheaper colors were available. Others refused to board unless the stub number ended in an even digit. One famously grumpy poet claimed he wouldn't ride any train if his ticket included the letter Q. Why? He never said. Some boundaries are personal. And all of this, every ritual, every habit, every nonsense superstition, emerged not because the ticket was magical, but because we made it magical. Because we needed something small to hold in a world that moved too fast. Because in the chaos of clanking metal, blowing whistles, and uncertain arrivals, that little rectangle was the one thing we controlled. The one thing we chose. So tonight, as the train hums beneath you and the world outside falls deeper into hush, you look at your own stub. Maybe you kiss it. Maybe you fold it. Maybe you do nothing at all, except hold it a little tighter and think, this is mine. This was my journey. And that's enough. The train is coasting now. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. Like a breath in the chest of the world. Outside your window, the darkness has shifted. Less ink black, more charcoal. Morning isn't here yet, but it's thinking about it. Somewhere up ahead, a station waits, lamplight flickering, a sleepy porter stretching in the cold. You're almost there. But before the ride ends, let's go somewhere deeper. Not a town. Not a stop. Something quieter. Quirkier. Let's go to the people who never left the world of railway tickets. Who didn't just ride the trains or collect the stubs, but lived among them. Slept beside them. Built their lives around them. Tonight, we arrive at the doorstep of the railway ticket obsessives. Yes, real people. Flesh and bone and tweed and spectacles. And absolutely bonkers about tickets. Let's start with the ticket archivists. These were not official employees, mind you. Most were volunteers, or, more accurately, obsessives who volunteered themselves. They haunted old stations, railway depots, and auction houses, tracking down every possible variation of every ticket ever printed. They built massive filing cabinets, sorted by line, then by year, then by punchmark, then by printer batch. One gentleman in Lancashire built a ticket index so vast it required its own shed. He called it the vault. He wasn't joking. The thing was climate-controlled, had a guest book, and required cotton gloves to enter. Visitors were required to whisper. Whisper. Around little rectangles of card. Historians still argue whether these amateur archives preserved cultural heritage or simply prolonged one man's obsession with the smell of aging paper. The answer is probably yes. Then you had the ticket artists. Not just collectors, but creators. Some used old stubs to make mosaics, portraits of locomotives, city skylines, even the Queen's face, all built from real tickets. Others turned their walls into installations, layering ticket after ticket until entire rooms were papered with phantom journeys. There's a photo of one such room, taken in 1909. Every square inch, walls, ceiling, door, is covered in tickets. No two the same. A calendar made from stubs. A lamp wrapped in fares. The caption simply reads, "The ticket room." He would not leave it. Which is either poetic or deeply unsettling, depending on your mood. Then there were the forensic collectors. These weren't just enthusiasts. They were detectives. They tracked printing errors like bloodhounds. They obsessed over ink gradients, paper grain, edge wear. One collector could identify a ticket's origin based solely on its smell. London tickets were printed with a particular type of glue that gave off a faint almond scent. Apparently, these collectors weren't interested in destinations, only details. A slightly misaligned serial number. Jackpot. A stub where Bradford was spelled Bradford. Holy Grail. Some even created entire replica ticket presses in their garages, just to understand the old methods. One man's wife reportedly left him after he spent 6 months recreating a punch pattern lost in the 1870s. He claimed it was worth it. She got the house. He got the punch. And of course, the story binders. This final group didn't care about rarity, or ink, or perforations. They cared about people. These were the ones who found old tickets and researched the riders, who pieced together love stories and tragedies and everyday errands from a name, a date, a route. They'd look at a torn stub from March 3, 1886, from Liverpool to Bath, and wonder, was he going to a funeral? Or a proposal? Did he make it on time? Some even wrote entire biographies based on found tickets. Fiction, sure, but fiction rooted in real ink and paper. One story tells of a woman who discovered a faded third-class ticket tucked into the lining of an old trunk. She traced the route, found the train records, matched it to a journal entry. It had belonged to her great-grandfather, aged 17, fleeing the city for a life at sea. The stub was his first step toward becoming a sailor, and later, a poet. That ticket now sits in a frame above her desk. She says it hums when the wind is right. You may roll your eyes, but you can't deny it. Some objects carry more than weight. They carry momentum. And all of this, the obsession, the reverence, the whispered devotion, comes down to one idea. That the humble railway ticket is more than paper. It's a memory you can touch. It's a journey you can hold in your hand. And even when the tracks rust over, when the station's close, when the engines stop puffing into the night sky, that little rectangle endures. It waits. It whispers, I was there. You were there. And so now, as your train begins its final approach, slowing to a gentle, lullaby rhythm, you look down at your own ticket one last time. It's just a stub. Just a piece of card. But it's your stub. Your proof. And maybe one day, someone will find it. Slip it from between the pages of a book. Hold it to the light. And wonder, where were they going? Did they ever come back? Maybe they'll wish they could go too. The station glides into view now, warm lights blooming through the dark like candles. The train slows softly, no lurch, just a hush. A sigh. You stay seated for a moment longer, letting the sound of the brakes ripple through your bones like a lullaby. You've arrived. But you don't have to get up just yet. Take a breath. Let the quiet settle in. No rush. The world can wait. Out your window, the platform is still empty. No chatter, no footsteps. Just a breeze curling past the benches, and the occasional flicker of a moth around a lamp. Somewhere nearby, the metal of the engine creaks as it cools. A mechanical exhale. You press the ticket gently between your fingers one last time. It's worn now. A little bent. A little soft at the edges. But it's carried you this far. And whether you drop it in the box or keep it tucked inside your sleeve, it's a part of you now. A piece of paper, sure. But also a moment. Emotion. A memory. The world is so full of noise. Of rushing and clicking and flashing and swiping. But tonight was just tracks and time. Ink and iron. Breath and stillness. So lay your head down. The ride is over. And the story lingers.